Well, the purpose of this slideshow is to show you the ingenious ideas that are absolutely without limits. So I'm going to start you off with showing you ways that people use to hold unusual shaped stones and the usual shaped stones too. You can make very simple settings with tabs. And these designers, the first one that you're looking at is called a cabochon stone. It's a dome-shaped stone. So the student made a platform for it, and then he made two V's out of rod, standing straight up, and then he bent them over the dome of the stone. And the flat stone next to it has a little tab too. Again, it's a flat tab, and it was bent over the stone. So it not only holds the stone in, but is the design of the ring. And the balls, which are very unusual to see in a ring, are held in ingenious ways. In the broader part of the design, a hole is punched that's a little smaller than the marble. This may be a beautiful piece of glass or a bead. So it's held together by a prong that pushes the ball into the circular area. So there's many ways of making settings for stones. And if you go to the beach and you pick up some little stone that you like and you think is beautiful, why not incorporate it in your design and make your first ring for your mother or father? I always think you should be making your jewelry for people you love. Jewelry is an intimate gift, and you're going to put a lot of labor into this. Often you'll use around 4 classes or 5 classes just to make your first project. So you have to plan and decide on. I'm going to show you a whole variety of different kinds of rings and pendants and pins in this slideshow, and that's why I put this slideshow together for you. In this slide I'm showing you, I think the one thing I want you to look at with this way of setting things and holding them in place, look at the way the little silver heart or brass heart is anchored into this ring with 2 movable jump rings, and that's ingenious. There's also the middle slide shows a ball in a cage, so that when you move your finger, the ball rocks back and forth to both sides of the ring. Really nice. And the other large marble, the sort of colorless one, is held in by a crown and a support crown on the bottom. So these are all ideas that you can incorporate when you make a piece of jewelry. The traditional way to hold stones in is with a bezel. And I'd like you to remember that word. It's B-E-Z-E-L. It's a thin piece of metal that goes around an oval or round stone, and then it exceeds the height a little bit, and then it's burnished over the edge of the stone, and the stone is held in the jewelry for life. If you look at these examples, these are all the traditional bezels. Now, these are the more commercial type settings that you would see, even though these rings are very artistic and not what you expect. And this is the kind of jewelry I expect from you in this class, for you to start designing things. They're going to look very different than what you buy at MBK, Mabokran, or other commercial places where you buy jewelry for yourself. But that's the beauty of the elective class, is that you're going to be making something called art jewelry, one-of-a-kind pieces. So these 2 rings are the usual kinds of rings that you will see in rings that are made by craftsmen. These employ bezels as they're normally made. One uses prongs as well that go over the bezel and hold the bead or stone in. And you can design this once you get your stone. But before you design a ring, the stone is, of course, the centerpiece, like the centerpiece on a table. And you have to get that stone secured first. You might go to the beach and find an interesting rock or stone, or even a fossil of some sort. And then you start designing around it in order to make it into a ring. So one of the most fun kinds of rings to make is something called a stack ring. And it's a ring that's made out of maybe 5 or 6 or 7 other little rings. And each one is textured differently with punches and a hammer. And you can put them together in any sequence you want on the same finger. And that's why it's called a stack ring. And it's I think that one of the first things you can make is something simple like this. Actually, you're using wire to make the rings. Then you flatten them or use punches, or you can do the back of a hammer, or you can make a textured hammer and hit them. And you got to be very careful not to make them too big, and if you do, you have to cut them and resolder them together. But these stack rings are beautiful, and I wear them, and my students look at my hands and they say, well, I like to make something like that immediately. So and it doesn't use a lot of metal. It's using silver wire. You need about 8 grams of metal to make one of these silver stack rings. The ring on the left side has a little flower on it, soldered to it, with a tiny piece of gold in the center, or it could be brass. Silver wire gives you a lot of possibilities, and I've seen a lot of pairs of earrings that look like little faces. The elements are soldered together, the eye, and sort of suspended and soldered. Even though all these earrings that look like faces look a little bit the same, they're all really quite individual. And the first earring on your left is made out of a thick wire that's been thinned in the middle and then allowed to be thick again near the end, and it's coiled just so beautifully. So working with wire is a great way to start jewelry, and especially if you want to make very, very individual looking pieces for people, because anybody who receives something like this, your mother or grandmother, they're going to love it. One of the unique things you can do with wire is flatten it out. So both ends of all the elements on these 2 pieces have been flattened with a hammer. And you can make wire go from flat to round to flat again. And it's beautiful because we call that an undulating line. And there's so many possibilities. The earrings on the left are like a little mobile with flat little paddles, and they turn and spin and move. And of course they attract a lot of attention, and that's why people make things like this. But all these are made by designers. They're whimsical and they're beautiful. And keep remembering that you can always hammer wire flat when you're achieving your design. But I would show you some more designs in wire, because wire is wonderful to work with. And you may say, Mr. Hochberg, when I start your class, I think I want to start with wire. I'd like to learn how to use the pliers. You have 3 main pliers: your flat nose, your round nose, and your needle nose pliers. It's called a chain nose pliers. And you can make wonderful bends, and all of these pieces have been made with a simple pliers. And the infinity ring took a lot of planning. There's a lot of thought in that. That little pictorial up on the right hand upper side, that's an infinity ring. If you look on Pinterest and some of the other websites, you'll find people who do as a craft, working with silver and copper wire, making jewelry, and they actually don't do any soldering. So that little guitar on the left is all held together with smaller wire, binding wire, and many things like that have been made, and there's an awful lot to find on YouTube about that kind of work. The stone on the right is actually soldered wire holding in a gemstone. So wire work is very, very popular, and it's a whole facet of jewelry making. So although you can work with wire and no soldering, really when you start soldering sheet metal to wire, you're learning a lot about jewelry construction. And this is where kids really start to bloom. So eventually everybody who works with wire starts to add in sheet metal. And lots of wonderful novel designs come out. And some of these that you're looking at right now are coming from designers all over the globe. I see my job in jewelry as an instructor to try to show you all the possibilities. I've seen kids make small earrings, again, just with wire. But then when I introduce beads and stones, and I start seeing them learning to solder, that's where design really takes off. It's really exciting when I start seeing kids experimenting with sheet metal and texturing it and combining it with wire. And then they start with having what I call a real jewelry authentic experience. And especially with all the earrings that should be made, I try to get girls to make earrings for themselves, and they won't make the bigger works of art. And I ask them, why don't you sit down with a pencil and design something that you think would be quite elegant to wear. It's exciting when the students start to see the possibilities of layering metal on top of metals, either brass, copper, and silver together. And they come up with some amazing stuff. And it's so much more exciting than them just cutting out shapes of flat metal and turning them into earrings or pendants and things like that. The students to see that texturing metal is very exciting, and they start to make wider bands. And also those little rings on the left that you're looking at now with various shapes, amorphic shapes of silver, flat metal with little faces cut in with a saw, are really exciting. So they in the beginning they want to make jewelry look like jewelry in jewelry stores, and that is one of the hardest hurdles for me to get over, to do their own thing and make one-of-a-kind pieces. And that's where I get very happy when a kid's in creation. The kids are always saying to me that I seem to like the rings that are more organic. And I do, because they're highly personal. So when kids make bands that include stones, and the ring is rather amorphic and the metal is textured, I'm very happy because the kids can see the possibilities. And that one little ring on the right where a student used band making silver, about 15 gauge, and then making that little sort of amorphic star on top, that was some insight. And I told him to cut away the metal underneath and just have that star float on the two ends of the band. And he was so excited when he saw it. He just said, wow, this is really looking amazing. And I said, it's amazing because it's personal and it's truly artistic. I really like the rings that are one of a kind. And these are the rings where a student will work maybe more than a month, maybe 5 classes, 6 classes to bring the ring up. It takes time for kids to realize that the finish of the inside and the whole work of art is got to be on a professional level. So I have very few kids that have me long enough so that they know that, and they don't tell me, oh, well, you can't see the inside, so what does it make any difference? And I said, no, we've got a 4,000-year-old trade that we have to be true to. Kids really love ring making, and I tell them, well, why don't you make it for all the people who supported you, paid for your school, your mother and father, and that somehow they don't do that. I don't understand why they don't make original presents. And some of these things, some of these rings are just outstanding to me and amazing. So ring making alone can really excite students. I have a lot of students that get into ring making and they want to do nothing else. And it's a little exasperating because I'd like them to go on and make a pendant or a bracelet. And but my classes are so intense. When you walk in, it's like you're in a factory. There's no social activity going on. Most of the time the kids are so focused and so busy. And it's delightful for me because I'm there as a consultant to help people with technical problems in soldering or bending or things like that. I love it when kids find out what steel punches can do, and they can make their own steel punches, or both ends of a hammer. Sometimes I sharpen one edge and it makes the silver, when you hit it and overhit it, look like tree bark. And as these rings get older, they actually get more beautiful. They start to oxidize inside the lower parts, and they become very, very, very handsome. So I have kids that really discover this, texturing the metal, and they lose their fear. Unlike people in art, when they have a white piece of paper in front of them, it intimidates them. But here, they have to have a plan in their minds, and they have to make a pretty good 3D drawing so I can understand what direction they want to go into. Another thing that I really like are pieces that are hooked together that move, so there's a kinetic element, like in earrings. So some of the kids discover that by themselves, that they can make units that are hooked by jump rings together, and they get another element in its movement, you know. And the earrings that are made like that really become quite exciting. There's one little earring on the right, sort of towards the right, near the middle. It looks like almost like a Chinese character. It's metal that's been soldered together and then hammered to give it this calligraphic look, and it's very, very, very beautiful. I like planning a lot, and if you look on the left, you see that white square with two earrings, and those earrings are it would be called from a time of Art Deco, where they use half circles and arcs and 90-degree bends. So that pair of earrings is absolutely exquisite. There are other ones in this slide that I really would like you to take a deep look at. Those leaf earrings are quite beautiful too. And the little corner on the left has some very classical pieces of sheet metal, geometric shapes that are beautiful and very classical. Getting so much amazing work from the 8th grade. I teach a class of 8th graders in 9th and 10th. Some of these earrings are phenomenal. Look at that symmetrical, those two spirals, which is a wire pendant made out of brass. And look at the twisted leaf, the long leaf that's been textured and twisted. It's just amazing what these kids can come up with. That wire with a small bead hanging in the middle, and then these beach stones that were collected and drilled through with a diamond drill, and two earrings were made like that. and I just love that piece a lot. I try to tell the kids you can include coconut shell and buffalo horn and many other kinds of materials that look beautiful, even wood. I want to draw your attention on the left to the little dog who's made out of levels of silver sheet. And above that is a bumblebee, and lines have been hammered into it with a punch all around the cutout design, which makes the design look so alive and active. Take a look at the design on the right. That was done on a computer, and then the design was pasted onto flat sheet metal. And you would have to say, when you look at a piece like that, the yin and yang, the negative and positive, are so balanced. So these pieces are just extraordinary for students in high school. It's just on the university level. The kids in my class ask me if they can copy something that they've seen on the internet, and I say absolutely. You know, for a long time in the arts, it was verboten to copy another artist's work. But in jewelry, it's amazing if you can copy it. You learn just so much trying to copy it. The little dog in the middle, kids often put their own spin on things. So the legs go through holes that are a little large for the wire. So the legs are in constant animation, and they're sealed on the other side of the dog. And it's a great pendant. And the cyclist, well, that's almost like a corporate logo or something like that. It's gorgeous. So seeing some high style design work really motivates the students, and a lot of times they're on their phones or their iPads. Kids see the amazing effects of oxidation on a piece of work. Those two waves, that's a pendant. And as pieces get older, the silver naturally turn black because these kids are working with 100% silver. And silver has two personalities. It can be tempered and hard, or it can be annealed and malleable and very soft. So bringing metals together, learning about negative and positive space, it's called like the yin and yang of space. And looking at elements that have been soldered together and metals combined, the whole craft becomes like magic. The kids asked me, Mr. Hochberg, two of those hearts look like they're damaged. And I said, well, that happens in life, doesn't it? And they looked at me like they suddenly had another thought about that. They're not damaged, they're held together. And hearts are wonderful things for students to try to make, especially the heart that loops around a leather thong. It's quite beautiful and very elegant. I also like those little fish in that pendant that are made out of brass and soldered in, and it looks like an underwater scene. And check out the cat in the left-hand side of the frame on the top that has a little fish in its stomach. Jewelry saw is an amazing tool. Look at that ring on the left top part there. And that's a ring with a little guy on a swing, swings back and forth on your finger. If you can imagine it, you can make it. And these kids feel so empowered. They're starting to see with negative and positive space and the effect of it. And that cat with a little cat next to it is a wonderful example of what you can do with just flat metal and a jewelry saw. The jewelry saw blade it goes down to as fine as almost a human hair. And it can cut absolutely incredible detail into a piece of sheet metal. Disturbing the surface of metal with punches and drilling and cutouts is so vital to this craft. The elephant and the balance of negative areas that have been cut out, the dancer, of course, which was in the last slide, and layering metal is a constant source of excitement to children. So I've really been having a great time teaching this. Many of my children have discovered that they don't have to make jewelry. They can make little desk sculptures like insects and crabs and birds, and it's so wonderful. The magic that they've learned in this class is the whole idea of torch soldering. It takes a lot of finesse and time to get used to lighting the gases and losing your fear of fire. But once you do that, you can unite these metals with so much strength. Silver solder is not like electrical solder, lead solder. It is extremely strong. It does not fill gaps, so things must touch 100% while you're soldering with a torch. The kids seem to love the responsibility. They know the torch is 2,000 degrees, and it is certainly dangerous. But that's what intrigues the kids. Their whole nervous system is engaged in my class, and it makes for every class to be so exciting.